December 17, 2025. The headline was short, and the air felt strangely heavy. SHINee's Key said he would suspend his activities, and the one sentence attached to that reason made people's hearts pound even harder. I thought Injection Auntie was a doctor. SM said he visited a hospital in Gangnam through a friend's recommendation, and that he first came to know the person in question there as a doctor. They added that while receiving treatment at the hospital, there were a few times, when it was hard to visit, he received care at home. And they stated that, taking this matter seriously, he would step away from scheduled activities and withdraw from the program he was appearing on. The fire started from suspicions surrounding the person called Jusaimo, and as the shockwave spread, Key also ended up standing in the middle of the rumor storm. And that's where a strange feeling begins. Because Key was someone strongly associated with the image of being careful. So then, where did it start to go wrong? Did he truly not know? Or did he want to believe he didn't know? Today we're going to follow that one question, and we may end up confirming it once again, that where the light is strongest, the shadow also becomes the darkest. SHINee debuted in 2008 with Replay, and it's not an exaggeration to say they changed the air of the era. The music was sophisticated, the movements were razor sharp, and though the team was young, it felt, strangely, already complete. And inside that, Key was always the person in charge of detail. The angle of an expression, the texture of clothing, the temperature of words. In the places most people would just pass by, he kept stopping, then touching them again. On stage, light poured down, and that light turned people into myth. But myth always comes with one condition. You have to look okay, always. Key's character was also clear even off stage, and on variety shows he was loved for his especially sharp sense and blunt honesty. People looked at him and thought, that person, at least, knows exactly where his line is, so it feels even more unfamiliar. Overnight, the words activity suspension get but stuck next to his name, and then terms like home treatment follow right behind. A peak lifts a person high, and the higher you are, the louder even a small mistake hits when it falls. From here, we'll slowly examine how the image he built was made, and why that image is shaking even harder in this case. For idols, image isn't a poster. It's closer to a kind of lifestyle habit, built from daily choices, stacked day after day. Key looked like someone who kept that habit well for a long time. He endured not by saving words, but by knowing the responsibility of words. He had balance, honest, but trying not to be rude. On stage, Key was fast and precise. In choreography, where even being one beat late shows, he always stood on the side of the exact one. That precision was personality, and it was also survival. Because the K-pop system is more brutal than people think. Skill is basic, attitude is basic, and on top of that, it demands a life without controversy. People often misunderstand. They think celebrities only work when the camera is on. But in reality, their work often starts after the camera turns off. Meetings, rehearsals, travel, waiting, travel again. And the next day, you have to live again with the next day's face. In that process, some people lose their character. Some people harden it even more. Key seemed closer to the latter. So in this controversy, the first words people likely thought of weren't even blame, they were surprise. Key? In something like this? That question is the big mystery of this case. The point where he says he didn't know, and where the agency explains he was introduced as a doctor. If that point is true, then the problem may not be just one person's mistake. The moment someone looks like a professional, and the moment that belief becomes so natural, you forget the procedure of checking in the first place. That's how myths crack. Usually not from something huge, but from a small habit called surely, no way. People who have seen an idol's life up close often say this: there's no time to recover like a human being. The signals the body sends are simple. You need sleep. You need air. You need to stop. But schedules always whisper, just a little more. When that little more piles up, at some point normal and abnormal switch places. Being exhausted becomes the default, and being okay becomes the exception. And in those moments, people look for the easiest choice. Save time, reduce pain, find a way to stand in front of the camera right now. The problem is that easy is not always on the same side as safe. In this case, the agency explains it like this. Key visited the hospital through a friend's recommendation and first came to know that person there as a doctor. And when it was difficult to visit the hospital, he received medical procedures at home a few times. But he did not recognize that this process could be problematic. Here, there's one feeling we can't afford to miss. Before anger at excuses, there is fear about how a system makes a person numb. The moment someone is introduced as a doctor, and that statement becomes as natural as air, a person chooses dependence instead of verification. And that dependence sometimes becomes deeper, especially for someone who has a strong sense of self-control, someone who must always do things properly, someone who must never make mistakes, someone who must always look normal. For that person, the path to saying, "I thought they were a doctor," can be surprisingly quiet. At the starting point of this controversy, there were suspicions of illegal medical services surrounding broadcaster Park Nare. As the person called Jusaimo stood at the center of suspicions tied to prescriptions or IV treatments, public attention surged all at once. And the bigger the shockwave grew, the more people began searching the surroundings. Traces on SNS, photos taken together, comments, message captures. Now it only takes a few hours for the border between fact and speculation to collapse. Key was mentioned in that flow as well. Reports say the rumors grew further as things like photos resembling Key's pet dog were referenced on the SNS of the person identified as Jusaimo. From here, the nature of the situation shifts slightly. At first, it was suspicion, but at some point it starts getting consumed like confirmed fact. Words get faster, emotions move ahead, and the person involved always explains too late. SM said the reason their official statement was delayed was that communication was needed with various parties related to an overseas tour schedule. But the public isn't used to waiting, especially in an era where silence reads like admission. In those few days, Key became the person who must explain, and people demanded one single sentence from him, yes or no. But the world is full of things that don't fit into those two words. The real issue, beyond right or wrong, is what rule was broken in that process, whose trust was hurt, and what must change so it doesn't happen again. So in the end, this becomes not just one person's controversy, but a story about how fame so easily sucks in even private medical care, health, and relationships. And at the end of that expansion, Key finally spoke. December 17th. First came the agency's statement, and then his personal apology was released. The core was clear. How he first came to know the person, the assumption he believed in, and the fact he learned only later. The agency said Key first knew the person as a doctor, continued receiving treatment at the hospital, and that a few times he received medical procedures at home. And they added that during the controversy, he learned for the first time that the person was not a licensed doctor. Key's apology moved in a slightly different emotional direction. He said, "I took pride in believing I was far from things like this." But that very thought kept him from examining his surroundings more wisely. And he spoke of his apology, his shame. And the conclusion was stepping down. He would withdraw from planned activities and step off the program he was appearing on. Here, many people split. Those who say, "How can I didn't know" make sense. Those who say, it's possible, but he still has to take responsibility. Those who say, this goes beyond an individual, it's a system problem. Maybe all three can be true at the same time. He might not have known, but celebrities stand in a place where "I didn't know" can't be the end of the story, because that place is built on trust. So regardless of how the facts of this controversy are ultimately settled, it appears Key chose stopping as a way of first embracing the portion of responsibility that is his. And that stopping carries a light completely different from stage spotlights. Not a spotlight, but fluorescent light. Not emotion, but the light of procedure and verification. Under that light, anyone looks a little shabby. But maybe, to return to being human, there are times you have to pass through that shabbiness. Whenever I think of this case, one image keeps overlapping. The lights pouring down on stage, and somewhere inside a home, quietly hanging, maybe, a transparent IV line. Both can be devices for survival. One is a device you must shine with for the audience. The other may have been a device believed necessary to endure the next day. But the problem is this. Sometimes a transparent IV line becomes more dangerous precisely because it's transparent. Because you don't see it, you let it slide. Because you get used to it, you forget to check. Because it becomes normal, the boundary blurs. In Key's case, both the agency and he stated the assumption, "I thought they were a doctor." If that assumption is true, then this isn't a simple scandal. It leaves a bigger question: how trust is formed and how it can be abused. And that question returns to us too. What would you have done if you were too busy, too exhausted, and someone said, "It's okay," in that moment? Would you still have had the strength left to verify? Of course, that doesn't erase responsibility, but it can change the way we understand humans, even slightly. Because ending it with only blame feels too small for how universal the fatigue of this era is. Key stopped. Whether that stopping is the beginning of reflection, a time to reset, or the entrance to a bigger change, no one can conclude yet. But one thing is clear. Even when myths collapse, they leave us questions. The stage lights may turn on again someday, but things like transparent IV lines must never be allowed to exist transparent again. What must be checked, must be checked. The boundaries that must be kept, must be kept. That simple principle can become the last safety net that protects someone's career and their life. And we watch, quietly. Whether Key will pass through this time and return with a stronger face as a human being, or choose a completely different road. Whatever the ending, one thing won't change. The songs and moments he left remain as the memory of an era. Please, let this stopping be not the end, but the beginning of recovery.